Hello, everybody. I'm Avin Zarlez, and with me today is Hayden Barnes. Hayden, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Avin. Great to be here. I am the Senior Open Source Partner Manager at HeroDevs. I am a Unix nerd. I am a operating system fan. I am a ARM ambassador, a Microsoft MVP, and I love technology.
Awesome. So, what's your day to day like at HeroDevs right now? What are you focusing on right now?
So right now, I am leading our NES for .NET program. That is not the Nintendo Entertainment System. That is our never-ending support for .NET. HeroDevs provides post end of life ongoing security support for open source frameworks, stacks, um, front end tools, and we recently took on .NET, particularly .NET 6, after it reached uh, end of life. Um, so I came over and have been building that program out, working with our engineering staff, our sales, our marketing to promote that, as well as collaborating directly with Microsoft. Where the concept of post end of life third party support is a relatively new phenomenon in the .NET ecosystem. We were first to market with this. It's more common in like the Java ecosystem where you can get support from multiple vendors. It's a new idea in .NET, and we're taking some time to win people over, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when you think about software end of life, a lot of, commercial companies are just very much used to, nope, that version's out. You either live with the consequences of an unupdated platform or migrate to our other platform. But when we're talking about these open source systems and developers being able to do something post end of life, um, what that's a big mental shift, especially for .NET developers, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing we run into is large enterprises make extensive use of .NET, and they tend to have dozens, in some cases, in large corporations, hundreds of .NET applications spread across multiple versions of .NET, and they have limited resources to migrate. And where NES for .NET comes in is provides them an additional bridge to their modernization strategy. So we don't want to necessarily keep them on end of life software. We always recommend moving to the in support versions, but we recognize that with limited resources and the cost of migration and multiple migrations potentially happening at the same time, we provide a lifeline to those enterprises to remain secure on what they have while they make those migrations.
So, like, from a platform point of view, uh, when you're building out platforms that will have an end of life and thinking about them post end of life, what other than just being open source and letting people like Hero Devs deal with it, what can a platform think about to make that transition easier for companies?
In terms of like the upstream open source projects,
Yeah, like I guess I'm thinking there's some ways that you can make that end of life cycle easier in the future, both letting outside developers figure out different parts, make it easier to be able to port, future updates into it. But also just for the developers of a platform itself to be able to think about future migrations and how you implement your system, your APIs, your tools in such a way that allow for people to switch more easily in the future.
yeah, there's a handful of things that platforms can do here. Um, those include release notes, getting those release notes out, major version increments between versions that have breaking changes, a regular release cadence, with sensible version numbering, Um, Deprecation notices with sufficient advance notice. One example is I was reading the release notes for the latest FreeBSD release, and they've actually went ahead and indicated that they were dropping a platform support like in two versions, like many years in the future. They're going ahead and giving the heads up that's being dropped. Um, a great example source of these best practices are actually the criteria to apply to the HeroDevs Open Source Sustainability Fund. That's a fund of $20 million we've set aside to fund upstream open source projects. It's part of what we do in terms of supporting open source upstream projects. But the criteria there for joining include some of these best practices. So if you're interested in those best practices, even if you're not interested in applying to the program, well, I would encourage you to. Those are collected there and can be useful for upstream developers and maintainers to consider.
Yeah, that fund sounds incredible, and I would love to dive more into it. What scale of projects are you talking about? That are you talking something at like the node scale, or popular node packages? Like what's the scale of project that could apply for the fund?
So we approach our collaboration with upstream open source in a variety of ways. When it comes to large projects like Node and Apache projects, uh, oftentimes there is a direct relationship with the underlying organization or foundation. Um, and that is a reciprocal relationship where their deprecation notices may link to HeroDevs. In some cases, on some of the medium-sized projects, we simply hire the developers doing the upstream work. Um, when it comes to the Open Source Sustainability Fund, these could be smaller projects with maybe one or two maintainers, but are critical in many cases to open source, and they're interested in one-time grants of some kind or another. So when it comes to those big projects, we want to partner with them. We want like the uh, Node.js, where their deprecation notices specifically list us and say, hey, this version's going EOL, but if you can't move, here's HeroDevs. And then we have an agreement with them to help support their ongoing work. That's big projects. Those medium-sized projects and smaller projects, I'm even encouraging maintainers of .NET libraries, popular .NET libraries, who are facing time constraints, resource constraints, to go ahead and apply.
Is there a certain time period that you're still taking funding of projects, or like there's there a window to apply, or is it an ongoing rolling thing?
This is active and ongoing. We have a pool of $20 million we're literally trying to give away. So we highly encourage open source project maintainers to fill out the application form from the HeroDevs website, get in touch with our team, and review those criteria that I mentioned before, those best practices, and let's talk, because we want to be a part of the open source sustainability. So we want to be a part of the open source sustainability solution.
Now, as someone who's been developing for a lot of years, I think about the containerized world that we're in today, and one of the big advantages of that is that sometimes you don't have to update things as much as you used to, right? You used to fundamentally have to, have a computer somewhere that's sitting to your server and needs to be compatible with that computer. But now I could just pick a version number and stay in that container, right? So beyond the kind of obvious of like, what if a later security flaw is found with that version? What are some other considerations one might need when thinking about what things you do need to update, and which ones are fine at kind of, living forever encased in a particular version number?
I mean, this is a serious challenge. Uh, the open source community for a long time, let's be honest, relied on Bitnami's community open source containers, and those have gone away. And if you do a search on GitHub for how many projects still rely on those containers, many of which are post end of life. I mean, we're talking over 10,000 references in Helm charts, in other Docker files, in GitHub Actions to post end of life, unsecure Bitnami community images. So these are widespread, and a lot of people do just set the version number and let it go. But those go end of life. We now do have distroless containers, but you still have underlying it, a lot of these containers, you still have underlying packages and components in the containers that also can develop have CVEs reported. So it's not just, pulling a node container. It's a node container running on Debian, which might also go end of life. And yeah, it worked for a long time. And it may still work for you, but at a certain point, maybe you don't want to migrate. You've got to figure out a solution. So, there's other solutions reaching the market. There's other vendors offering post end of life security support within containers. It's something HeroDevs is definitely getting into and exploring. We definitely provide .NET containers, among others. And yeah, updating that underlying OS is also key for that.
Yeah. Tell me about like a big success story you've had. What was something that was a particularly momentous migration that you were able to either get someone on a very old version up to date on, or get someone in a place where they could continue that old version in a way that's more sustainable?
Sure. So recently, .NET had a CVE that was rated at 9.9, which is 9.9 out of 10. It was one of the highest severity CVEs in recent history, the highest reported on .NET. It was a vulnerability in ASP.NET that allowed all kinds of smuggling through HTTP that could open up a number of nefarious attacks. And that's the reason why it was rated so high, is Microsoft looked at this and said, okay, this could be used for all of these things potentially. So let's rate it high to get attention. But we had a customer contact us within a day or two after that announcement and say, we need this patched tomorrow. And it was like, great. What you're running? Debs. Okay. We've got Debs. And they're actually like, no, we need Debian Bullseye. It's like, Debian Bullseye, really? This is an older version of Debian with an older version of glibc. And we were able, within a few hours, to set up a new pipeline, build a secure Bullseye image, and then rebuild .NET 6 on that container and get that container to that customer so that they were secure and able to meet the SLA that they provide to their customers.
That's impressive. Just a matter of hours being able to work on that fix. How I know that 9.9 is a pretty big event. What's the typical like CVV of thing that of security vulnerabilities you do tend to handle? I imagine most of them are not these fires that have to be solved within a couple of hours situation, right?
Not often. They tend to vary between, you know, your basic, privilege escalation, something that can trigger a race condition that, potentially brings down an application. Every every once in a while, we get something that interacts exclusively locally, like a malformed um, solution file that allows arbitrary code execution in Visual Studio. It really runs the gamut. Um, because .NET is such a broad ecosystem, everything from systems programming to web front end to microservices, things crop up in a lot of different ways, a lot of different places.
How do you manage figuring out like there's a particular vulnerability of a dependency of a dependency? I imagine you talked about going through the release notes, making sure which fixes were important, being able to highlight that code and pull that out. How do you manage all of that? Do you have like an internal system? Is this a secret sauce question that I shouldn't be asking?
No, I mean it's so there's a couple ways we approach this. First, we joined the .NET security group alongside Canonical, who publishes Ubuntu, and Red Hat, and we collaborate on CVE, responsible CVE discovery and disclosure prior to official Patch Tuesday releases. So we are able to ship uh, fixes in our NES for .NET distributions uh, at the same time that they drop in support versions. So we actually look at those patches and those CVEs, currently in .NET 8, 9, or 10, identify if they affect 6, and if they do, we go ahead and backport those fixes. And then internally, we mirror all .NET code as well as number of libraries and actively scan those for vulnerabilities and identify those. So, and
Makes sense.
some of our customers have specific versions or branches of libraries that they like to persist on. And if a CVE is detected in those, we do something similar where we backport a fix and then provide a custom NuGet package from our repository so they can remain on their version just with the secure fix.
Awesome. So since I'm ARM, I want to ask, like, what considerations would you have for ARM specific projects when thinking about this sustainability? I imagine you probably run into situations where people are on an older version, may not have a fix for a different architecture. What considerations do you have to have when thinking about ARM in this context of open source sustainability?
In terms of .NET or just more broadly?
Either.
Okay. When it comes to .NET, the ARM story both on Linux and Windows is solid. I have no issues building .NET applications on my ARM systems and then compiling to x64 and publishing those. It's seamless. I often will write a program and in I will often write a program and publish it simultaneously for Windows and Linux, for x86 and ARM. Like it just works, you know.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about future sustainability, you're making your life easier in the future by giving yourself multiple build options, build outputs.
Right. Um, I also personally don't consider a project done until it's automated. So when I post a project or code on GitHub, um, I almost always include GitHub Actions to, for CI, CD, tagging, releases and that kind of thing. And that's gotten much better. Of course, there's always been an x86 story there. There was a Linux ARM story on GitHub, but now we have Windows on ARM as well, which makes things um, much easier. And then a project of mine that I maintain is a fork of the GitHub Actions self-hosted runner that supports Windows on ARM as well as Windows containers. And now that we have Windows Server 2025 ARM container for Windows, it makes building for Windows on ARM locally, if needed, much easier.
Awesome. I totally agree with you about something not being like done from a production level until you have that automation. Having these automated systems just makes your life so much easier in the future. Um, how much has that automation, I mean, the tools have been leaps and bounds, but in particular, I imagine with having AI agents come in and being able to ask it questions about version numbers, have you experimented with that in your pipelines yet? Or are you still kind of, do more of the classic dependent bot and that's it?
Um, I've certainly experimented with, uh, scanning, your typical dependency scanning tools, Trivy, Fossa. Um, some of those SaaS products like Fossa are getting AI type, you know, um, features. I haven't necessarily, fired up like an SLM on my local system and applied it to a project. Uh, you know, Certainly things like GitHub Copilot um, uh, do, can do some migration, can do some security maintenance. Um, I actually think the inverse is going to be more of a challenge, where as vibe coding becomes more popular, and that's not a diss. I
Hmm.
love vibe coding, as a hobby, personal project. I think what's going to happen is the AI is going to pull in specific versions of dependencies just from inferencing that, oh, hey, the last time I checked, the last version of this was 1.16. Well, and it's going to tag that and pin that in the project. Well, actually, 1.16 has a high severity CVE, and the AI doesn't know that, and the developer doesn't know that, but you know they need to be on 1.21. So I think the rise of vibe coding may actually temporarily lead to an increase in more projects relying on insecure libraries. Couple that with attempts, well, successful supply chain attempts, vulnerabilities and exploits on things like NPM. Um, there's been rumors of attempts on NuGet and other package repositories. It could get a little worse before it gets better.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It really highlights the importance of not just thinking about vibe coding as like, you don't need to do this engineering. You can get a lot of that work done, but when you're talking about production ready, stabilized software, you need someone who knows what they're doing to make sure that you're thinking about those questions and addressing those for sure.
Yeah.
So going back to you specifically, right? You're like the expert on so many things, Windows on ARM or Windows Linux subsystem on ARM. How did that you get into that space? What brought you to that expertise?
So this is multi-pronged. And first, I don't necessarily consider myself the top expert in Windows on ARM. That title might go to Jeremy Sinclair, who dragged me reluctantly into this space. We'll come back to that. But I got started with WSL um, around 2016, 2017, early on when it was still WSL 1. And the short version of this is that I didn't like the 2016 MacBook Pro keyboard.
Hmm.
And I looked around at other laptops that had better keyboards, and I found a ThinkPad, and I installed Ubuntu on it, and it did 90% of what I needed to do. But for my job at the time, I did need some Windows software, so I dual booted Windows. But then I read about this WSL thing, and I'm like, okay, what is this WSL thing? Does this thing what can this do? And I very quickly found that it could handle all of my um, developer and enthusiast workloads right there, in much the same way Mac OS, had Office, but also that Unix terminal. WSL with Windows gave me access to Office and more common Windows applications, but also that Linux environment. So at the time, the community there was pretty small. There was a handful of us doing interesting things, hacking on WSL. Um, a few of us got together and put together a bespoke Debian derivative for WSL with a lot of interesting WSL1 specific things built in,
Yeah.
and actually put that on the store. And that segues a little bit into the sustainability uh, story I was talking about earlier, because we actually charged money for it. We didn't just give it away for free. It was open source, but if you wanted to build from the store, it was $5 or $10, and that allowed us to work part-time on the project. Um, when it came to ARM, I was initially very skeptical of ARM, and it was when I started to see the M series from Apple really, really take off, and I started to want that, but for my environment, which was Windows and WSL. And Windows has been available for ARM since Surface RT.
Hmm.
So this is nothing new. Um, but with Prism, the compatibility layer for x64 applications on ARM
Hmm.
becoming so good, moving to ARM, picking up a Windows dev kit um, early on, um, and nowadays I rarely need Prism. Like I, I have very few x86 applications left. So many things are built directly for Windows on ARM. Um, Linux distributions, run natively with their ARM builds. Um, that it's seamless to me. People say, "Oh, you've got issues, this and that." Not really. You know, to the point where I've moved past my Windows Dev Kit. I've got my Lenovo ThinkPad T14S maxed out with the latest Snapdragon Elite X Pro. I think it is, and it is a beast. I love it, and I can put it in uh, battery efficiency mode, take it on a plane, and easily get 12 hours of coding out of it.
Oh yeah, when I switched over to ARM-based laptops, it was such a game changer for me for multiple reasons. And likewise, I personally have not had as much issues migration. I know I came from a mobile development world, so a lot of my tools were already very much thinking about ARM for a lot of years before that. Um, but now, kind of everything is thinking about these containerized systems that are cross-platform and able to run wherever is needed. As someone who's actually done like maintenance for WSL systems on ARMS, what are some like unique challenges or things that you mentioned like some special things to make that work better? I'm curious, like what kinds of considerations did you have to make? What kind of tweaks did you have to do to make that system run well on ARM?
So a lot of the tweaks that we built into Penguin uh, with the W, because it was for WSL, um, were specific to WSL 1, which was a binary translation layer. When WSL 2 emerged, we got a uh, Linux kernel built into the subsystem. Um, and the need for a lot of those tweaks went away. Um, WSL has since expanded to include support for GUI applications. Wayland, Pulse Audio is all built in. 3D acceleration, um, things like DirectML, CUDA access. Um, it's really sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of booting a Windows desktop environment and then using Linux on top of it.
Hmm.
Not so many tweaks needed these days for ARM. Um, Very rarely I'll run into a situation where I want to grab a container and it's only available in x64. Um, and I can use QEMU uh, with Docker to emulate that just fine. Um, that's pretty rare though. Um, Almost all distributions, particularly all the distributions um, in the Microsoft Store, publish now uh, ARM versions, and it's seamless. So you go and you grab that version, regardless of what architecture you're on, and it's going to download and install the right one for your system. So um, that's nifty.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up our conversation, what last question I wanted to leave you with, since it's near the start of the year, what are your predictions for 2026? What are some of the things you think is going to happen technology wise this year? A lot of different directions it could go, but I'm curious as your thoughts.
Windows Phone is going to make a comeback.
Oh, I wish. I wish. I was a big Windows Phone advocate. I loved my Windows Phone 8 so much.
The original Windows on ARM. Um, uh, that's funny. Actually, we tested our original build of Penguin for ARM on a Windows Phone that had been flashed with a full version of Windows,
Hmm.
because that was the ARM hardware we could get our hands on um, at the time. But I miss live tiles. No, um, I think uh, we're going to see more mainstream adoption of AI. Um, I think people have a pretty good sense of what LLMs can accomplish, but when people start understanding things like Claude work, um, and similar features in Copilot, um, I know I've taken some docs and asked Gemini to make PowerPoints out of them and did a very good job. Um, we're moving past the question and answer LLM into the do things for me. Coders are already there, uh, but I think average AI users are going to start saying, actually do this task for me. Don't just tell me how to do it. Don't just walk
Hmm.
me through it. Just do it. You know, here's, here's the application. Here's the files. Just handle it for me. So I think that's going to be uh, a, a big step, where AI moves past that chat and to more, um, you know, uh, tangible, task oriented tool. We've seen some attempts at like asking AI to go book plane tickets, and it actually like opens a virtual browser. And, you know, I think agents are going to solve that. And, if companies open APIs, we'll get more of that. But in the short term, it's going to be make this PowerPoint better for me.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said completely. I think 2026 is really going to be a year that people get their hands on AI tools and start understanding, broadly, there's a lot of things that we label AI, but also specifically these like LLMs are not one size fits all. There's so much variety and difference therein that I think a lot of people who haven't actually gotten hands on don't really understand the different usefulness and capabilities. And if you're only thinking it as question and answer chatbots, you're kind of missing out where a lot of the value people are going to start figuring out the next year.
Right. Absolutely. I think people are also going to, I think people are going to learn the different types of LLMs and some of the downsides of LLM approaches. Because um, there are certain like smart home devices that are, trying to shift to LLMs, and I've heard mixed reviews out of those responses. Sometimes they get more
Hmm.
creative versus their first gen, you could say, AI. So sticking LLMs everywhere, I don't think is going to be necessarily a solution. I think specific AI models, you know, highly trained SLMs, um, multimodal models are going to come into play, um, and it's going to be education for everyone. Those of us at the bleeding edge, as well as mainstream consumers, as we navigate where we go from here.
Yeah, we were just talking earlier about vibe coding is a great concept. It's great at someone who like doesn't need to spend too much time on code to build a project and get it out there. But as people actually ship vibe coded projects, they're going to very quickly learn the long term maintenance of software, and you can't just throw it over the fence and be done with it in the modern era. And how you have to deal with that and the different tools that need to be built to be able to help people understand that.
Right. Yep. There's that whole, you push that thing to GitHub, and then all of a sudden you get issues opened. You're like,
Hmm.
wait, this is now a job.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anyone who's maintained an open source library, it is absolutely a job. But that's also where you have a fund to specifically encourage people to be able to put that time there.
Yep.
Speaking of which, give me some plugs. Tell me about where people can go to learn more about you or to learn more about your fund with HeroDevs.
Sure. Um, I have a great landing page on GitHub, where my username is Sir Redbeard. Um,
Good name.
uh, thanks. My blog is boxofcables.dev. Don't get to blog there as much as I want to, but you can also find me blogging over at herodevs.com. Um, I am on Twitter and Blue Sky at Unix Terminal. Um, I'm on Mastodon too. It's linked somewhere. If you find one of my things, you'll find a link to all the other things. Um, But yeah, I'm all over, and I'm pretty accessible. If you just want to drop me an email, it is hbarnes@herodevs.com. I will read and respond, and add me on LinkedIn too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hayden, for talking with us today.
Thanks, Evan. I really appreciate it.